Before you put your property on the market, before the drone goes up, before ads go live, before a single buyer sees your property, there's things that need to happen on your end. And most sellers don't know what those things are. They spend time and money on the wrong ones, and this video fixes that. This video is going to walk you through exactly what you do before you put your property on the market, what actually moves the needle from a buyer's perspective, and how they perceive your property, what documentations you need to have in order, and what to absolutely not waste your money on before you list. I'm Trent Babb with Ranch Roads Land and Commercial, and I specialize in land and commercial properties throughout Central Texas. And I've walked enough listing appointments to understand the difference between what sellers think matter and what buyers actually respond to. And here's something I want you to understand before we actually get into the specifics. The way your property is presented in the first 48 to 72 hours, as soon as it goes live, is the most important window throughout the whole listing period. That's when the algorithm starts pushing your property the hardest. That's the time when buyers who have been waiting for something, just like your property, see it first. That's when first impressions are made. And on land, first impressions are seen through a screen before anyone sets foot on your property. A buyer in Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, anyone out of state is going to see the drone video first. They're going to look at the photos, and then they're going to read the description. They're forming an opinion on your property before they smell the cedar, look at the oak trees, and even walk the property, which means the condition and the presentation of your property need to communicate its value visually from the air and the ground. So what we do in the weeks before we list directly affects how the buyer perceives the property, and perception drives price. So the first thing I do when we get there before we list is I try to visualize the access. Through the buyer's eyes, what do they see in the first 30 seconds upon arriving at your gate? Within the first 30 seconds, if the entrance is overgrown, if there's grass along the fence line, if the roads are rutted out, and if the gate takes 5 minutes to open, that's their first thought. That's their first impression, and that's a bad one. A buyer who's fighting their way onto the property immediately discounts the price. They're already thinking, okay, this is the things that need fixed on the property. So here's what to focus on. Mow, or if you have a blade the entranceway. Trim back any overhanging trees or brush, anything that's going to hit the car on the way to your property down the access road, down the entrance road. If there's a gate, make sure it opens easily. Make everything easy to access your property. And if you have an access key or a combination code, make sure those things are clean and it's easy and accessible. The first 30 seconds matter so much. Now, if there's ways to drive through the property with kind of like internal roads or trails for them to walk or drive the car through, trim them up or clear them out. A buyer who can move through the property more easily sees more of it. Now, to the best of your ability, walk the perimeter of the fence line. You don't have to replace the whole thing or get a brand new fence or anything, but any repairs that need to happen and obvious fixes, they need to be fixed. Anyone who's thinking about putting cattle or horses on the property, that is an immediate discount. They think right then and there, okay, how much is it going to cost to fix this portion or these portions on this fence? So the best thing to do is just get ahead of that conversation. Now, when you first drive up, if you have an address that sits outside of the fence line or any signage there, make sure it's visible and in good shape. A little paint goes a long way. In the drone shoot, I need to be able to locate the property and the property lines and also any access to the property. If you have a buyer going out there, you don't want them to feel like it was hard to find the property because grass and trees were growing up around it. They couldn't see the address or find the entrance. Now, the drone shoot is the most important marketing asset we have for land. And this is what I need from you to make sure this is done right. We shoot at the golden hour if possible, anywhere in the morning when the sun rises or in the evening when the sun sets. The light is soft, their shadows are long, the land looks its absolute best at that time, and the buyers can then visualize themselves on the back porch during the sunset or watching the sun come up, drinking a nice morning coffee, and let them visualize themselves at that piece of property. So I'll coordinate this with you, whether my schedule works or your schedule works, or if the weather is bad one day, we'll just have to try to time it up. If it doesn't happen, then we'll just plan for early morning or late evening. If those times don't match up, it's not that big of a deal. It's just when the property looks the best. But if the property has a water feature like a pond, a little lake, a creek, a seasonal creek or a river, the golden hour light reflecting off that water really creates a huge difference with the drone videos and the photos. Now, the days before we shoot, walk the property with fresh eyes. Anything that is piled up, any posts, fence posts, brush piles, anything like that is noticeable from the drone. 200 feet up, 300 feet up in the air, you see a lot more than on the ground level. A pile of, fence posts in the middle of the property from a drone view reads as a problem. It's something that the buyer is going to have to clean up in their mind. So from the ground, you may not even notice it anymore, but the drone sees just about everything. Now, obviously, if you have cattle on the property, I need to know about it. But I wouldn't worry a lot about, where they need to be. Cattle and horses in the drone video actually provides a positive visual if the property is being marketed for a working cattle ranch or a horse property. And also, if it's an ag exemption, a lot of buyers really like that because it reduces their property taxes. Now, if your property has a pond or tank, check it before we do the drone shoot. If it's low, if it has algae in it, that will definitely show up in the video, and we can time the shoot to minimize that. But the more you can do to present the water feature at its best is better. Now, this is the area where sellers most commonly slow down the transaction. That could have been moved much faster. Getting your documentation in order before we list means that when we go under contract and the buyer starts asking questions, we have those answers immediately. Any delays in producing these types of documentation could create anxiety for the buyers, and anxious buyers are looking for any way to terminate. And here are the most important things you need to get ready and in order before we go live. One is the survey. Do you have an existing survey that shows the house, the barn, or any permanent improvements that exist today? If so, I need a copy of this before we list so that I can send that to the buyer's agent so that they already have that during their due diligence period. Now, if the survey is outdated, if you've put another barn in there, anything that's permanent and that the survey does not reflect, we need to know that because the buyers need to understand that an existing survey will need to be purchased before we close, because the title company and their lender will require a new and updated survey before they lend or before the title company insures the policy on that. But knowing those two things saves tons of time and just conversation and back and forth. Pull your current deed. Confirm that the listing description matches what you're actually selling. Now, these could be a couple of different listing descriptions if you have 100 acres and they're split up in 4 or 5 different parcels, but we need to gather all of that information. What we'll do is we will open title at a preferred title company. They can also start pulling deed restrictions and boundary lines, any existing surveys or encroachments on the property from the previous sale, because a lot of the time sellers are under the assumption that where the fence line is where the boundary line is. And it's not always the case. It's better to know this beforehand before we go under contract and the buyer starts doing their due diligence, because it's going to pop up either way. Now, do you own the minerals under this property? Have they been severed in a prior transaction? Are there any existing oil or gas leases? I ask those questions because these are questions buyers are going to ask, especially in Texas. If you have the documentation related to any oil leases, oil or gas leases, or mineral right ownership, locate those now. If you're not sure about the mineral status or if you own a percentage of the minerals, this is a conversation to have with the title company once we open title, or even if you have a real estate attorney that you can talk to. We need to know this information before we list and go live. And next, do you have any current surface leases or active surface leases on the property? So cattle grazing, hunting leases, even a timber lease if you have that, agricultural leases, any of those types of leases we need to know. We must disclose those leases to the buyer under the Texas Farm and Ranch contract. So just find those written agreements and make copies of them. You can go to Bell County Appraisal District, type in your last name or your address of the property, and it'll pull up your tax statement. Make a copy of that, because this gives us the current assessed value of the property. It also states the legal description of the property and also shows whether the property is in ag exemption or not. If it is in ag exemption, we need to communicate that clearly to the buyer, because this will affect the buyer's tax picture moving forward. Now, is your property enrolled in any USDA programs? So a CRP program or any similar conservation agricultural programs. If so, those agreements affect what the buyer can do to the land and when they can do it. So just pull that documentation if you have it, and then we'll present it in the listing. So within my business, transparency is not just the ethical one, it's a strategic one. Because under the farm and ranch contract in Texas, sellers are required to disclose any material facts about the property. Any flooding history, environmental hazards, any pending litigations, any known defects or improvements about the property must be disclosed. My advice is this: if you know anything about the property that you think a buyer would want to know, disclose it. Don't try to hide it. Don't assume that it won't come up. And please do not wait until it comes up during the due diligence period. Here's why that matters strategically, not just beyond the legal obligations you have. A buyer who finds out that stuff during their due diligence period and feels like that should have been disclosed prior to that loses trust immediately. And that loss of trust comes back to renegotiating the contract, asking for a price reduction, or worse, terminating the contract completely. A buyer who was informed about all of that stuff prior to is already factoring in that price when they make the offer, and they're also committed to it. And even more important, it protects you legally after you close, because representations made in the contract survives in Texas law. But if you're uncertain about what needs to be disclosed, we'll go over all of that in the seller's disclosure notice. That's just part of the process. Now, not all land lists equally well throughout the whole year. The right timing depends on what you're selling, what type of property you're selling, and who you're selling it to. Most of the time, hunting land and recreational properties tend to do better in the fall. The time from August to October, because buyers are thinking about hunting season, but really hunters are always thinking about hunting season. But they're making decisions about where they want to be, and urgency is in your favor at that point. If you list in the spring, you're competing against buyers that have other things on their mind at this point. Agricultural and ranch land, spring is historically strong for ag land because they can see the property in its productive state. The grass is green, the trees are green, water features are full, and if your property has strong agricultural characteristics, spring listings take advantage of those features. Now, if you have commercial land or an investment property, those properties are usually less seasonal. Commercial buyers and investors are usually active year-round and are more driven by opportunity and tax reasons than the springtime or the late summer. Now, after all that being said, the reality is everybody's situation is different. If your property is ready to list, then it's time to list it. Don't wait for the perfect time to list your property. A well-prepared listing outside of its season will always outperform a unprepared property during the season. Now, this might be the most important part of this video because I've seen sellers spend money on things that did not get the return of the money they put into it. And I've seen sellers skip things that would have paid for themselves 10 times over. So you don't have to build a new barn or put in a new sprinkler system or bring in dirt for a brand new road. All of those things rarely get the return on the investment. When buyer sees those types of things, they want to do it their way. They want it to be their property. So do the math before doing anything or ask a professional. Now, another thing I see a lot is over clearing the land just to make the property look manicured. Buyers looking for land, royal land especially, want some timber, some cover, a lot of the natural terrain that goes along with Texas land. Overclearing could actually reduce the appeal for hunters or recreational buyers. So just clear what's necessary for access and presentation and leave the rest to the imagination of the buyer. Now, also don't repair things that don't reflect the actual use of the land. A crack in an old concrete water trough is not worth repairing during the listing, but a structural issue in an existing barn for its usability usually is. So focus your money on things that buyers will actually notice and discount. And don't try to make a royal property something that it's not. So if there's a residential structure on the property, paint goes a long way. You don't need to start ripping up floors or repairing the carpet. A fresh set of neutral or white paint goes a long way, and most of the time it gets more return on that investment than new floors or carpet does. A lot of the times the house is secondary. They're looking for royal land. Let the buyer make that property their own. They want to do it their way. So what is worth spending your money on? Access and road clearing, fresh paint on either the inside of a home or the outside of a barn, fixing the broken perimeter on fence lines, and removing any eyesores that will show up in the drone video. These are high return, low cost preparations that actually move the buyer's perception of the property. So let me give you a simple pre-listing checklist you can work on before we meet. Access and roads, cleared, accessible, and gate operational. We don't want our buyers breaking a sweat just opening the gate. Now the drone shoot prep. The perimeter of the property walked, debris is removed or organized, livestock is coordinated, and the water features are as clean as possible. Now documentation gathered, survey, deed restrictions, mineral rights info, surface leases, tax records, and any government program agreements. Disclosures identified. Anything material that needs to be disclosed or communicated to the buyer. Now the timing confirmed. We've talked about the right window and the right season for your property. But if your property is ready now, don't wait for the perfect time to list it. Improvements evaluated, making decisions about what needs improved and what doesn't. If you can walk through that list before we meet, we'll be ready to move fast. And moving fast matters because the sooner we're prepared, the sooner the right buyer sees your property. And if you want a checklist, I have a free listing preparation with a link in the description below that you can save. So preparing your property isn't about making it perfect. It's about presenting it honestly, clearly, and compellingly. So the right buyer sees exactly what they're getting and they feel confident moving forward. That's the goal, not a spotless showroom, a property that tells the truth about itself in the best possible light. The goal is to sell the property for the highest price in the current market conditions. So if you're ready to list your land or commercial property, a consultation or a listing appointment with me is completely free. We'll walk the property together. We'll cover all of this in person, and I'll show you how I'll market your specific land to the right buyer. You can text me directly. I don't answer a lot of phone calls anymore unless I have you saved in my contacts. I get so many spam calls that I'd just rather you text me. My number is going to be right there. You can also, if you have a tight schedule and need to book it in advance, you can also book an appointment with me. There's a link in the description below. I also have it pinned in the comment section. But I'm Trent Babb, your Central Texas land and commercial agent. Thanks for watching this video. We'll see you in the next one.